The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Unconventional Therapists. My name is Dave. I'm joined with my co-host. His name is Greg. He's here somewhere.
I am here.
Oh, there you are.
Hello.
I couldn't see you. We're just on audio, you know?
Ah, yes. Well, that's not true, Dave. I am looking at your beautiful face.
Yes, we are looking at I
And,
lied.
But
I
I'm doing,
lied.
you did, and I don't know why. I'm not sure why. I'm doing something where I have to, my table broke, as you know, or it's being used for something else. And so half my body's facing forward and I'm just turned towards you. So this is going to be really
super, super uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'm all twisted up.
You know, I fib to our audience just now, but you know who doesn't fib?
Who?
Dennis Rader.
He fibs?
No, not really.
Oh, okay.
Not to the courtroom when he tells them all his. I'm going to be honest with you. So, you know, I know you're going to do the intro, but like, just this was one that I've been wanting to do for a while. This topic, which I just leaked. It is Dennis Rader, BTK. But I ended up being way more disturbed by it than I thought I would be, because I thought I kind of knew most of it and like what he was, you know, his MO and what he was all about. But there's elements to this I think we're going to get into that I kind of had a second thought about, like how interesting he is, or just like, you know, I just kind of like have a different feeling about him than I think I went into it with.
Yeah, so I didn't go into it knowing a whole lot about him, but what I found out disturbs me in a Dahmer-esque kind of way.
Yeah, there's that. I think that's the best way to say it. Is just there's something disturbing about this individual.
Yeah,
and it's not necessarily just even the dark nature of, you know, the stuff that we're going to get into. It's more of like him, his personality. His personality is disturbing because they're, you know, as you're learning about this person, it's like there could be people like this everywhere and we would never know.
Yeah, and I can't wait to kind of get into some of this like what if scenarios.
Yep.
But let me first ask you a question, Dave.
Okay.
Can you be a great family man, like a caring church leader, while simultaneously terrorizing the entire city for nearly 3 decades?
Apparently you can.
Apparently you can.
As we've learned.
So this guy, we're talking about someone who's a scout leader, a church leader, a dog catcher, who, you know, probably did not hesitate to ever put a dog down. And maybe one of the most appalling human beings we could even talk about. That's where I kind of landed on this. This guy makes me want to take a shower.
Yeah. Well, was he actually a dog catcher, or was that just part, like a responsibility he took on in his what was the name of? He was like a compliance officer. Right.
So it fell into the umbrella of one of his duties, and you know, it was animal control.
I think willingly.
It wasn't. Yeah, he's like, I will put the dogs down, since no one seems to want to do that. Just an awful person. So I think that we should start from the beginning, like we always do, and I can take us on a little journey and get him up to adolescence at least. All right.
Yeah.
So born in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Almost had you there, right? So
Kansas.
Yeah, right. So it's almost like Paris, Texas, and these weird things, whatever. Born in 1945. Interesting fact, right around the same time that Hitler died. And
so Hitler's spirit went into that. It's like in those movies where the spirit goes into a newborn baby as they're born.
Absolutely. So like, it's funny that you say that, because I was thinking like maybe there's only so much evil allowed in the world.
Oh my goodness.
You know, so I kind of thought like that's just what happened. Like, so when I'm like 1945, end of World War II, let me go line this up with Hitler. So, I mean, he was actually born just before Hitler died, so it couldn't have really worked out that way. But still, it's fun to think about. Yeah. Both parents worked. His dad's a former Marine, and he would kind of later report feeling neglected by his parents. But that's actually pretty much the extent of the trauma. If you're looking for it.
And it's almost like, is he at this point, like when he actually states that, is he trying to make his own set of excuses to justify the behavior that he did?
Yeah, no kidding. Listen, we grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, so it's like our parents, we were neglected. In the 40s, dude? I mean, come on. it's not like he was. It's not like he was in like the 1890s and had to go work at a plant. I mean,
Right.
he was as traumatized as anybody else born in that
Yeah.
decade.
Yeah. And
And,
it makes you wonder if a person like him, which, we'll talk more about his personality later, if he's ever satisfied with the level of attention he's getting.
right. Yeah. No, nothing's ever enough for young Denny.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So from a young age, he's kind of observed that like his parents noticed that he was kind of into cross dressing, which no problem there. Sadistic fantasy, that's a little bit of a problem. And zoo sadism, Dave. Have you ever heard of zoo sadism?
No, what does that mean?
That's it's kind of a hallmark for serial killers.
Oh, the animals.
Yeah, killing animals, hanging animals. When I was growing up, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you before. Maybe it falls under the umbrella of urban legend, but there was, and maybe satanic panic too, but there was always a lot of rumors in my neighborhood that this kid, and I won't protect him, Bill Jordan, was hanging squirrels around and
Was
he would say I was doing that. I never saw it, but it must be hard to get a hold of.
can I tell you one of the recollections from Dennis Rader of his animal abuse?
Please.
This is how sick it is. So imagine, like, you ever seen those? I picture like almost like a cartoon where you like they have like a box and they kind of prop it up with a stick and it, like, you make a trap out of that and you like
Bugs
kind of pull
Bunny.
the stick. Yeah. So he would do traps like that, but when he would trap cats or kittens, I guess. I don't know. And there would be a hole at the top of the box for their head to peek out. And after he would trap the cat, when they peek their head out, that's when he would put the noose on.
Yeah.
So it was like this whole game of like cat and mouse and like very, very like disturbing.
Like a really intense, messed up version of the child's game Mousetrap.
Yeah. And you like think about that. And then you think about the later murders that he commits. And it's like, wow, how telling was that? That guy.
Like escalation. It's like he
Right.
is like the poster boy for escalating.
Can I ask, are you going to get into where some of the tying came up?
No, I won't.
Because I do have a story about that. Really
Yeah,
quick.
yeah. Talk to. Well, I know that he found some, bondage porn, which was probably pretty difficult to come across in the 50s.
He was playing a game with friends, and they would go into, I think, a silo, and they would play some kind of game where they would like tie each other up, and that was kind of his first experience with tying someone up. And he stated this himself, that was like the first time of kind of recognizing that tying someone up or even being tied up himself was sexually gratifying for him.
Yeah, there's an element of sadism there that's there from the beginning, and so in interviews and people who have spoken to his mother, this was kind of a hard nugget to find, but he used to become aroused when his mother spanked him. Now, can you imagine being that poor woman? When your kid's like, ooh, like, it's just a really strange thing to kind of, be punishing your kid and slapping them and like seeing a weird like enjoyment in their face.
I mean, and the whole thing with him though is like he was really into sex at a very early age before, like, I mean, I feel like I was dumb about that stuff until I learned about it. That I was like, yeah, but like,
yeah. I feel like I'm still dumb about it.
Yeah, it feels like at a very early age, he's talking about being aroused about different things and like kind of realizing different fetishes he has.
Yeah, like
and
being 9 and saying I'm aroused. Weird.
Yeah, what? It's like it. Honestly, a lot of his stories make me wonder if he's even being truthful or if he's saying these things to build a story about himself.
Well, and we'll talk about it later on, but do you remember when we talked about Blanche Monnier, the lady that was locked in in a room for years, decades?
Yeah.
She became sexually aroused by feces just because of her condition. So it was environmental for her. But there's obviously some kind of lines being mixed up in the brain where like dopamine's being fired off in the wrong places for him. And he's being aroused at things that he should be kind of appalled by. Almost like Dahmer too, like there's similarities there, and with Dahmer, no real trauma unless you count his middle name being Lynn. That might serve as some kind of trauma for a young man. But I mean, So, all right. So he was an okay student as well, right? He only attended a year of college, but I'm not getting into that. Don't worry. Before heading out to the Air Force, which, if you ask me, is the creepiest branch. Um, I'm sorry to our Air Force fans, but it produces a lot of doozies, and the people in the Air Force would agree with me, I think. But to kind of recap, like on some of the highlights of his childhood, he was a Boy Scout. I don't know how you feel about that. I feel like,
I think it's like of the time.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's hard to pass judgment on that because I feel like wasn't that kind of a common thing for
Sure.
in the years he's growing up, especially.
Did you know any normal Boy Scouts? And I don't want to step on any toes again. I feel like
I do. I actually do.
David,
I actually do.
Sorry, I see
no,
Dave.
Not me. I never did.
Boy Scout patches behind him.
No, I never did it. Absolutely not. No, but one of my best friends did it for ages. I think he was an Eagle Scout, maybe.
Wow,
the best. That's the best, right? And then he never wanted to do it again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's that. His parents were intensely religious, super religious.
But they also live in like Wichita, so.
They live in Wichita, and it's the 40s. I mean, a lot of people are religious, right? He even when he was a child, though, he practiced a lot of stalking skills, going into his little teen friends' houses and stealing their panties. And it's explained that he was very, very, and this will follow him into adulthood, methodical about the way he researched his victims. Not that it would always, like, you can't plan for this, like things will always kind of go awry, but he kept files on people. He really paid close attention to their movements. And I think there's something, again, you mentioned maybe doing another like stalker episode, because there's something to that where somebody's watching you at all times, knowing what time you leave the house, knowing when you go to the bathroom, knowing when you go from room to room, what time your husband leaves, what time your dad leaves, what time your brother goes off to school. Like they know all those things about you and you know nothing about it.
Yeah.
That's dark.
Super dark.
And another thing people talked about, and maybe this has something to do with his brain not producing, like his reward system being kind of messed up, not to make excuses for him because he doesn't deserve any, but no real sense of humor. People talk, not a funny guy.
He didn't look like it either.
No, he looked like he had no idea. Like imagine him telling a joke.
I heard someone talk about this and I thought it was like really relatable. Or not relatable, but like I totally get what they were saying. They said that when people would see him or like when like he looked like a nice guy, but then this person was like, I don't see that when I look at him. And I kind of feel the same way when I look at him. I'm like, no, he kind of looks like weird, like creepy.
Well, people even
it looks like he'd be like maybe like a boring dad or a serial killer.
Yeah, no, I know. He definitely had the look. I mean, a lot of people were saying he's handsome.
No, people said that. Nobody said that.
When you look at some of the Air Force pictures, all right, he's all right. You know what I mean? And
I was gonna say I've never heard, and this is like one of the only ones where you really don't hear anything about like good looks and charisma and charm, but he doesn't utilize any of those things to commit his murders. So those aren't even like things he needs.
Yeah, what's scariest about him is his ability to just appear like a dud. Like no one would ever think about that. Like him being this like
exactly
closeted freak.
What would you say? Unremarkable?
Unremarkable, yes. He could hide in plain sight.
I feel like that.
You think you're unremarkable?
Oh, 100%. I feel like I have a face that nobody remembers me. Literally. Like I have this experience often and I'm like, I could probably do this stuff.
Like Anne from Arrested Development?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's not true at all. You have a very strong following in the other podcast work you do.
No. One of the things I will say is when he was in the Air Force, I thought this was interesting. He was already engaging in like the stalker behavior while in the Air Force. So that's like a pretty like bold thing to do, right?
Oh yeah.
To do it while you're in the Air Force. And he was like watching women undress through their blinds and he's breaking into homes and stealing undergarments and stuff like that.
And he's also, which I'm sure isn't incredibly strange, but he's engaging with prostitutes when he's in the Air Force, but he's trying to get them to push the envelope a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And they're kind of just not having it because he doesn't really have a demanding presence or anything like that. He really has to, I think binding for him is the key because no one's ever going to let him touch them. But it's he does have all these components. He just hasn't put them all together yet. But there's scary elements that turn him on. First of all, stalking turns him on.
Yeah.
Being bound turns him on. Pain turns him on.
Yep.
Power turns him on. Like this is all control. This is all very, very
Greg,
scary.
one thing I'm gonna have to correct you on.
Oh boy.
Someone found him attractive.
His
and
wife?
her name was Paula Dietz, and he married her in 1971, less than a year following his return to Wichita from the Air Force. So someone did.
Yeah.
And eventually he ends up having what, two children with her, I believe.
Yeah, someone probably wrote in her yearbook, nice girl, not the best judge of character.
You always hear the same thing about him though, with his roles in the community and family, like you mentioned. It was I guess, I mean, you hear things like he was a good father. I don't know, like, who's judging that? Like, he was a father. He was a church member. He was a community member. He was all those things. He filled those roles, and he had a dual life, like you mentioned at the very start of this, about having that ability can you have that ability to have a dual life like this? He did. He also had dreams of becoming a police officer, which, given everything that you described, I think is very, that makes sense in his personality. He would be that asshole police officer. Thank God he didn't technically ever become a police officer. He was a compliance officer, which is a little different. But imagine what he would have done with that level of control. And he would have been a maniac cop. He would have been murdering and covering it up.
Like, would that have satiated him a little bit? I mean, I wonder.
I think this would have. I think he would have had a hard time. Maybe it would have for periods of time, because he does go. There are a lot of gaps.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, and we should probably get into his adult life and the crimes now. But, interestingly, there are periods of time, like over 10 years, where he doesn't have any crimes at all, which is, or maybe, I mean, so as far as we know. Yes,
exactly. That's a great point. And I think at the end, we can tie this all up by kind of maybe furthering that. So he gets married in 71. In 73, he gets a job as a small aircraft manufacturer. And he's working in 1973 towards his bachelor's at Wichita State University, because, as we mentioned, he also gets his education. He's not a dumb individual. I guess he's rather bright in some ways. I don't know. I don't think he's the smartest person that we've ever discussed, but he's definitely not the dumbest.
Average Joe.
He's an average Joe. Yep. So in late 73, he was let go by the aircraft manufacturer. They're called Cessna, I believe is how you would say it. And then at that point, he finds himself unemployed. And I think that really takes a toll on his mental health, his happiness, and he gets a ton of free time, which is probably not a good idea for someone like him. And actually, you know what, Greg? I think when we were just talking about those gaps in time, I think that has a lot to do with it. He needs to be busy, because when he's idle, or when he's a multitasker without a doubt, like he can do numerous things. Like he's stalking while working and going to college and having a family. Like he can clearly multitask, this guy. Is he doing anything perfectly?
Someone, and then he's like late for the PTA meeting, and he's got to it's just so.
He takes his kids to what was it? Was it a Boy Scout thing or like a Little League game? I can't remember. At one point, to get out to go stalk, he has to like say he has a headache while he's there, and then he uses that time to leave. Yeah, he's all over the place, this guy.
Yeah.
But during this period of time in 1973, he gets unemployed, and this really takes a toll on him. And with all that idle time, he starts to get really obsessed with the idea of strangling a woman with his bare hands until they're dead. And in 1974, he decides at some point, or gets so compelled, that he's going to now start to act on those obsessive fantasies. So he begins to do what he calls trolling, which I think is hilarious that he's using this term trolling, which we now currently use about internet stuff. But he's doing it in his way, which is driving around. It's basically stalking. It's driving around certain neighborhoods and checking out for women that he, are going to become his new targets. And if I were ever to get an opportunity to talk to Dennis Rader, which I've tried and it didn't work yet, here's what I would want to ask him. Here's question number one I want to ask him. What made a person your target? What about them made you decide that's my target? Sometimes his target, is connected to him. Sometimes it's not connected to him. But sometimes it just feels like I just need a target. So it's the first woman I see. But I'm really curious, is there a rhyme or a reason? Is there certain things about people that would make them a target for him?
Maybe their vulnerability, just like a kitten or a squirrel, or there has to be an element of, because he's not a strong man.
Well, I was going to say one thing that is pretty known is he did go for women who were smaller.
Yeah,
like you said, I think he would have to look at them and know, I think I can overpower them.
Yeah. And some women, he's like, I don't think I can handle that. Well,
yeah, I actually think one of his first victims was 5'3". So he was going for smaller women and Latina, which apparently he had a thing for Latina women. Okay. So he would stalk women. Maybe they were in the grocery store, or they're out shopping. And he'd make this plan to hide in their cars and kidnap them at gunpoint, which isn't exactly how he ends up doing his first killing. So, and also, not a great thing, but he also is really good at tying knots. And I'm assuming a lot of that comes from his experiences as a Boy Scout. So he knows how to do at least 6 different knots. And it's wow, really cool guy.
Yeah.
But he does.
What are we training people to tie knots for? I mean,
isn't that a big Boy Scout thing? Tying knots?
It is. Look, I was in the Navy. I never tied any knots.
Yeah.
I mean,
you never know when you're going to need to. And he found a reason why he needed to.
Yeah, you're right.
So he would know how to tie knots and nooses from his skill set as a Boy Scout. And then at this point, he eyes Julie Otero, who's 34, and her daughter, Josephine, who's 11.
Yeah.
And Latino, like I said. But he had been stalking them for weeks. And he, the day he decides he's going to attack, he brings his little hit kit, which includes a gun, some knives, hoods, cords, tape, plastic bags, gloves, and various tools for breaking and entering. He cuts the phone line before he enters, which very smart.
Yeah.
So they can't call for help, and he breaks in. Now, he had been stalking them for weeks, thought he knew the ins and outs of their routines. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that Joseph Otero, who's 38, was home because he was recently in a car accident and he's out of work. And also their son Joey, who was 9, was home at the time. So he did not expect to see the two of them. He did expect to see Julie and Josephine, but he was surprised. He takes them hostage, I guess. Well, what he does is he goes in and he gives a false story of why he's there, which is super interesting. It's I'm on the run. I need, I need a place to hide for a little bit. And he ties them up and starts to strangle them. But the interesting thing is, as he ties them up, they at times they'll complain oh, it's the tie is too tight, and he'll loosen them to make them more comfortable.
He's I am pretty good at tying knots.
Yeah.
Almost an Eagle Scout.
I do think that this is a little bit of a tactic to calm them, or maybe make them feel like there's a chance they're going to survive. He doesn't tell them he's going to kill them.
No, but he knows the whole time he's going to, especially since he's not wearing any disguises or anything.
There's no mask. Yeah, exactly. There's no mask. He knows, but he never actually tells them. But he does tell them all these other false things that are kind of just as scary, just not to the realm of I'm going to kill you. But you could probably start to put that together as he's strangling you with various things, Ultimately, he ends up killing Joseph, Julie, Josephine, and one Joey, I believe. And they actually had 3 other children who weren't home at the time, who came home and later discovered the bodies. And can you imagine what that must have been like for those 3 children to come home and find 4 of their parents and their 4 family members dead. It's so tragic and sad. But one of the things that's really notable about this murder is it's his first, obviously, but also during this, there were times where he had strangled them, thought they were dead, but they actually weren't. So when they revived, he had to strangle them again. And this happened to, I believe, Julie and
you go off into peace, and then you wake up and you're still in the nightmare. It's horrific.
It's felt or thought that actually he enjoyed this, and this became part of his MO.
We've seen that. We saw this with Chase, right? Wasn't it Chase that we saw this with? And Dave, this is a sexual crime too, but no penetration.
Yes, he doesn't actually rape anyone that and sometimes he'll actually say, I'm going to rape you, but never does. What he does do is satisfy himself. So he does masturbate, sometimes during, sometimes after they're already dead. But that's typically something that will happen. And, we don't have to get into some of the gruesome details. And if we kind of made a conscious decision here to I'm going to give an overview of these murders, but we're not going to give every single detail, just the things that we feel are kind of notable, because you can literally listen to any story about BTK. And that's the thing that people mostly focus on. And I think we want to talk more about the psychology and some of the things that happen that we feel are interesting in that psychological realm. But a lot of the thought process and stuff like that. So yeah, it's all for sexual pleasure and control. And those two things seem interchangeable for him.
It's almost like an addiction too, where so the way dopamine works is if they do a brain scan on you and they watch an addict, they're not having the most high levels of dopamine when the drug's injected. It's that process of getting the drug. So the real arousal for him is I hate to use the alchemist, but it's the journey and not the destination, right? Once it's all done, it's kind of, he needs to do it again and starts over. It's the process that he really enjoys.
Right. So this was his first murder. And around this time, actually in 1974, this is also the year that and I don't know if he had already started by the time of this murder or if he got hired after, but he begins working for ADT, which is a home security company as well, which is wow, that's what better way to even further his skill set in breaking and entering than to learn the ins and outs and also set people up. He could go for his own customers or people he knows have the security systems and learn ways to tamper with that or mess with that. I actually heard something about he would do little things just to mess with people. He'd break in their house and adjust their temperature in their house to super hot just to mess with their bodies.
That reminds me so much. That's so insidious because it's almost like Big Pharma or something. It's let me go ahead and sell you the disease and the cure.
Yeah.
Right. He probably creates, because as these crimes go on and he doesn't get caught for years and years and years, the Wichita is terrorized, right? They know this guy's out there. They know he's stalking, and they know ultimately he's killing. So they're buying ADT.
Exactly. They're getting ADT.
So they see him pull up and they're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
It's the ADT guy. He's going to make me safe. And he's probably keeping his eyes open to see if you're a vulnerable person.
Yeah. So Dennis Rader basically wreaked havoc on Wichita from 74 to 91, let's say. That's kind of what they believe, maybe but then there's questions about whether that was his last murder or not. He worked for ADT from 74 to 88. So that was a big thing for him as far as a ploy, a way to get in on some of the people that he.
Yeah, so he's not this tactical genius who's able to sort of do this intense FBI level. When they're I remember that episode of Sopranos when they're following each member of the family around. And that's not really who he is. He's the guy that comes to your house, gets a lay of the land because he's installing the security system. And obviously he knows how to override the security.
Yeah.
Because he put it in.
Yep.
Just dark.
So in the same year that he does the Artero murders, he ends up murdering again. His next victim is Catherine Bright. She's a Coleman employee. Also, so was Julie Otero. So he was connected to them somehow. But she returns home where he's already waiting with a gun. And he believes she's going to return home alone. But he is wrong again. And she's actually returning with her brother, whose name was Kevin. Kevin is a freaking survivor. This guy gets shot multiple times. He gets a gunshot to the head.
Mm-hmm.
And he still survives. But unfortunately, he's unable to save his sister. So she was stabbed to death. It was almost like a panic thing, like because he's fighting. He has to fight with Kevin, then he has to fight with her. It was just really messy, and this happens a lot with him. Like it's almost like he had like an intention of how he wanted the murder to go, but because of things that maybe were unpredictable or just didn't go the way he planned, he ends up having to do it a different way. But no matter what, he tends to do the things he sets out to do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So this is another messy murder. Things are often going wrong for him, despite the level of planning that he reports doing. But the unfortunate thing is, in as much as I hate to say it, he is lucky.
Yeah,
he's very lucky. Like Kevin somehow survives, and they still doesn't have enough information to be able to lead them to someone. And he lives in the same town.
Right. It's almost like it's sad that it brings to light that idea that we have to talk to people about a lot is there's no such thing as a just world. Just because you're doing good things doesn't mean good things are going to happen to you. And just because you do bad things doesn't mean bad things are going to happen to you. It's like, that sucks that's how it works. Yep. We don't want it to work that way, but that's kind of how it works.
Here's where Dennis's ego starts to get into play. So I guess there was a young man who, allegedly confessed to the killings of the Oteros with his two friends. Dennis then decides to send a letter, to the police. And he says, this is what the letter says. Those 3 dude you have in custody are just talking to get publicity. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK. You see, he added again, they will be on the next victim. So this is his way of announcing you have the wrong guys or the guy. And that's when he introduces his own nickname. He gives himself a nickname, which you don't do.
Right. He's no Zodiac with his letters to the papers and to the police.
I do like the way he tries to dumb down the language, but it's not like really that. It's very intentional that he's trying to do it. He's trying to dumb down. It doesn't sound natural at all.
Right. Just, what's sad about, the golden era for serial killers, the 70s and 80s is like, that was enough to keep them off your tracks,
I will say BTK is a pretty good nickname. Bind them, torture them, kill them is like, it's dark.
It's like really scary.
That's scary.
Yeah. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
One of the things I've been thinking about lately is how effective just talking can be.
Yeah, so many of people hold on to things, Dave. We bottle them down. We feel our problems aren't big enough to need therapy, but this is the furthest thing from the truth.
And I know for me, therapy allowed me to have a space to discuss things I hadn't really discussed with anyone before.
That's true, Dave. And I wonder about some of those things you were talking about. It sparked my interest a little bit. But one of the greatest benefits of therapy is having your own space and being able to express whatever it is you've been holding on to.
With how convenient access is in today's day and age, there's absolutely no reason not to try therapy.
Exactly. And BetterHelp is one of the most convenient ways to give it a try. It's completely online and will work around your schedule, so you don't ever have to leave your house.
And the best part of it, if you don't get that tingly feeling from your selected therapist, you can switch it up with no fee.
Or maybe if you do get that tingly feeling, you might want to switch it up. But BetterHelp understands how important it is that you feel connected with your therapist.
So get it off your chest with BetterHelp.
And visit betterhelp.com/nothing today to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nothing. Something about just adding them to each thing.
I know.
Makes it worse. Like if it's just bind, torture, kill, that's dark. Bind them, torture them, kill them. Because you know what it
Like it's his
implies,
motto.
and it implies them like is more than just one.
Right. And it's
I'm
going to
gonna,
happen again and again, almost,
yeah,
you
there's
know,
something suggestive about that name that really makes it like dark.
I don't like it.
No. Um, his next murder is in 77. So a few years later, he enters the home of there's a 5-year-old child who he sees. He ends up entering this home by, you know, getting the 5-year-old child to, or overpowering him. Barricades the boy and his two siblings in a bathroom. He does this thing where like there's two doors to the bathroom. He blocks off one and then ties a rope to another one to like ensure that they can't get out. Somehow he like maneuvers that. But basically, the three siblings are in this bathroom while he has Shirley Vian, I believe is her last name. Um, and he is murdering her while the three children are in the bathroom. And the oldest one that, I think it was the one that let him in, is just banging on the door, like, you better not, like, stop hurting my mom. So they're very aware of what's happening to mom outside of the room, which is super tragic. And at one point, though, I guess he ends up barking back at him, like, if you, something like, you better not come out or I'm going to blast you, to like a child.
Yeah.
I mean, he already killed a child in with the Arteros, so I guess this shouldn't be that surprising. But it's just very, very like, like, I don't know. I don't even know what the word is for it. Just he killing parents in like right in front of their children, or when the children are just in the room over, knowing that their parent. That's such a tragic thing.
And what's scary about it is he'll be with children because he's like a Cub Scout leader.
Yeah.
And you know, when you think of the person that's doing this, you have this image in your mind of this like scary, horrific person. And when you see Rader, you're like, oh yeah, you don't give it a second thought. And that's what's scary.
He's a dad at some point in his life. He's a Boy Scout member, leader.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's children in his church, which he is, a leader in. And but he has no regard for them.
No.
When it comes to these murders, there's a part of him that completely over compartmentalizes life and can seem to shift from one domain of his life to the next without letting any of it leak over.
Well, yeah, but and we're obviously going to talk more about that, but that's what I mean by saying, it's not like anybody, and we don't have to get into antisocial personality disorder. That's probably where we would go with this. But the thing is, just because someone has antisocial personality disorder doesn't make them dangerous at all. But if someone's already a really dangerous person, like a really dark, hateful sort of murdering person, and then you take away the capacity for empathy, or he's fear, essentially, right? He has no fear of like what could happen. Like every time he does this, he's putting everything on the line, like his leadership in the church, his family.
I think fear is an interesting thing, because when it comes to people who have like sexual arousal by certain things, I feel like fear ends up becoming a non-factor.
Yeah.
When they decide that they're going to go for whatever that sexual gratification is, it's almost like fear suddenly kind of is gone, or maybe fear is a part of it that they actually enjoy, like the thrill.
Yeah. It's a strange thing.
It's like people that do stuff in public, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like couples that do stuff in public, they're doing it because they're scared, but it's like thrilling to them, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Later in 77 in December, he ends up binding and strangling a 25-year-old woman named Nancy Fox, and he's pretty bold. At this point, he goes to a payphone and calls the police and tells them, you'll find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. And I believe this is the one. I could be wrong. I believe this is one where he leaves the phone off the hook dangling. And the next person to come in to use the phone is a firefighter. And he sees him in passing, but he just knew a man came in. He didn't have any descriptive way to he didn't have any like descriptive details to give anyone. He just said, oh, there was a guy in passing. How lucky is that this, and someone who like, he's kind of in this authority role comes in and still is not even like able to facilitate any kind of investigation.
He was just like carrying a pot of chili because that's what you know what I mean? Like I didn't see it. I don't know what was going on.
It's so weird, so weird. I mean, and there's a lot of little things like this. There was also one of his victims that her husband was coming home as Dennis was leaving in her car. The husband passed her car, said, "Oh, that looks like my wife's car." Then just saw that there was like a man driving. So, oh, it can't be my wife's car. Comes home, actually didn't find his wife for like 45 minutes because the way that her body was laying next to the side of the bed that you wouldn't normally see. He thought it was weird that he couldn't find her and her car wasn't there. But again, because the thought wasn't in his head when he passed by Dennis, he didn't think to wait. It just dawned on me. There's nothing remarkable about Dennis to report.
That's what I'm trying to, I was just gonna say that.
Right?
Just like a car drove by me and I can't even think about who was in it.
Just a guy.
That's his superpower. He's got the cloak of invisibility. He's just the most unremarkable person.
He literally walks by someone leaving a payphone, and that guy can't describe anything.
He's a ghost.
Yeah, he really is. He really is. And as he goes along, he keeps announcing himself to police, right? And, at some point he starts to send letters to this Wichita-based KAKE TV. Is that Cake TV? It says like, how many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention? And he writes a few suggested nicknames: the BTK Strangler, the Wichita Hangman, and the Asphyxiator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I don't know about that one.
I know that one, yeah.
So I mean, he's doing these murders. He's trying to get press. He's obviously very that's a big thing for him. So as much as the murders are sexually gratifying for him, and he's like
attention,
obviously they're an outlet, he's trying to get attention for everything too.
Yeah, and like sending dolls that with bags wrapped around their heads, like little nooses on them and everything like that, as if dolls weren't creepy enough. You got to really creep him out.
In 79, he does a phone call to report. Oh, they end up the authorities end up releasing the phone call that he did to report Nancy Fox's death, and hoping that someone's going to hear it and recognize it. But I mean, there are some listeners that called in, but for the most part, there was no relevant
his wife heard it and she's like, I don't even,
whose voice is that?
Not ringing a bell.
So I mean, it just all goes again, it just keeps the same themes keep coming up. Like there's just nothing about him that really rings notable.
And maybe that's something that drives like the craving for attention.
Right. Like
no one's ever noticed me.
He's doing the thing.
Look at me.
He's doing the thing that is the most notable thing ever that anyone could do. You do this, it's guaranteed like someone's going to notice, right? And not in the good way, but he doesn't care. He just wants some. Oh wow. And then he said he was neglected. He felt neglected by his parents. So it's all coming back to this idea that like he's not neglected as an adult. He's surrounded by people all the time, whether it's his job, his family, all the places that he always has to have a role in something, right?
Right.
But it's like maybe it's because of that lack of humor. Maybe he never really connects with people. Maybe he never really feels like people pay attention to him.
That he doesn't have that thing in his brain, almost like an obsessive compulsive personality, not OCD in itself, where it does. He never gets that feeling of, okay, that's enough. Like that's good enough. Like I've done.
Or
enough.
Maybe some of it's real, and it's not just his perception. Maybe some of it is like there's nothing that interesting about him that makes people actually show him attention in the way that like most of us crave attention at times. I wonder. I mean, it's hard to believe that like with all those things he's involved in outside of the murder, that like he wouldn't get some level of attention through those things. But who knows?
Right.
I mean, you said earlier he had no sense of humor. Imagine talking to someone who has no sense of humor. No, I'm probably going to avoid talking to them.
Right. Please get away from me.
Right. So let's see. Let me jump to 1985.
All right.
He strangles his neighbor. So he strangles 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, I think is her name.
Marine Hedge?
That's a interesting name. So she had just come from an evening of bingo and dinner with her boyfriend. Um, she's found dead by strangulation 8 days after she's murdered. All right, so I believe that she actually came home and with the boyfriend, and he wasn't expecting that, so he actually stayed in her closet the entire hour that the guy was there. The guy leaves, and Dennis waits, still continues to wait until like early wee hours in the morning. All right. So he stays in this closet. How creepy is that? She
The
does her
it's the
night
original R.
routine.
Kelly, right?
Yeah. She does her night routine. He's in the closet, and he decides to come out, and he like goes in the bathroom and just turns the light on like as if he belongs there. I can't remember if he's like what he does when he's in the bathroom, if he like starts masturbating or something. But she like wakes up, and then he goes in bed with her and then starts strangling her.
What a
How crazy. It's like it's almost like that idea of going in the bathroom, turn the light on. He that's how little he fears her too. Like goes to show he's not afraid that she's gonna fight and like win. But like just that whole waiting process is so incredibly creepy.
the entitlement and the lack of respect for people's personal space. Like he puts himself above everyone else in the world.
Yeah.
That's
That surviving boyfriend after hearing this must have been like that must be such a traumatic thing to be told later, that like that entire time you were the last time you saw your girlfriend, you were actually being watched that entire last encounter at her house, and like you had no idea, and you had no idea she was going to be murdered hours later, but also that guy was there the entire time.
like even if you the way our brains work, even if you heard like breathing or
Yeah.
something, you would kind of explain that away in your mind.
Yep.
It's just such a bizarre thing.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So 91, he
Yeah.
becomes a compliance officer for Park City, Kansas. And this is a role that I think says a lot about his personality. He becomes the worst person ever in a compliance officer role. He finds reasons to mess with people. He intentionally harasses them. He gets dogs put down. There's a complaint against him at one point because there's like a stray dog, and he starts shooting a tranquilizer gun while the dog's like around children. And the parent was like, I think you're more dangerous than the dog itself. And then he does finally capture the dog, brings it to a vet, and says this dog needs to be put down.
He's just that guy that's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You know what I mean? Like you need a permit for that, whatever it is. It's just terrible. So how does he end up getting caught? I think that's a cool story.
So, well, there's two murders that happened that I didn't get to. One's this woman Vicky. That was the one where her husband passes by him, and that guy actually, his name was Bill. He was actually questioned, or one of the suspects, for the killing.
Right.
But ends up, he doesn't falter. He doesn't give a false confession, even though he's being pressed. Sticks true to what he knows. That sucks obviously for him. Then in 91 of January 91, he ends up throwing a cinder block through a sliding door at the home of retired Dolores Davis. He strangles her to death, and he leaves her body behind a bridge. There's way more to this though than just that. Do you know this one? This one's really disturbing.
Yeah, I do know this one.
He brings her to his church, and he starts to take photos of her in different poses and all that stuff. And yeah, then he like wraps her back up, and this nonchalantness about just bringing this dead body to a church that he's a major member at,
Right,
and
that's what I meant, like, but no fear, but I don't mean it in like an admirable way.
No,
I just mean, and when he's talking to
no regard,
yeah, right, no regard for humanity. And when he does talk to the papers and the police, I don't know if he's feigning dumb. I think he might really be like when he's, he gets that thing like in 2004, someone's gonna, I forget what it is, like someone's gonna, maybe you can fill me in a little bit. Someone's gonna write like his story, or like write a book about BTK, because it's been going on forever, and he hasn't been caught. He's hasn't committed any crimes in years, and he decides he needs to tell. He's the one that has to tell the story. So he reaches back out. He would have completely gotten away with all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Actually, the compliance officer job, which, he's horrible at, ends up being the thing that occupies him enough to have him stop killing for a while. And, nobody hears from BTK from 91 to 2004, which is crazy that
Yeah, it's
satisfied him
13
enough.
years.
Um, so it was the Wichita Eagle. They run a 30th anniversary piece on BTK and just basically talking about how like BTK's faded from the memory of people after so many years. And he ends up coming back. So the Wichita Eagle receives an envelope from Bill Thomas Killman, containing a copy of Vicky Wegerly's. That's the one whose husband was questioned. Her driver's license, photos of her body, and BTK's distinctive signature. So this is kind of like his, I'm here. I'm still around. Don't forget about me. So then in 2005, a man finds Nancy Fox's driver's license and a Barbie doll with a hood over its head and its arms tied behind its back. So that when was that one? That Nancy Fox, that was an early one. That wasn't until 2005 that someone finds this.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's creepy, but he's doing these things. He's kind of trying to become relevant again. No, like he needs that attention again. And then he asks the police, "Hey, if I sent you as a floppy disk, is there like a way that you can figure out who sent it?" And of course, the police they're not sure, but they're like, "No, of course not. Like, just send it. It's safe." And that ends up being the thing that gets him caught.
Yeah, and it's because of this file that they found that was like deleted from the floppy disk or something along the lines, and it's probably like I think it was like a Word document, and
his name on it.
I guess they're whatever. We're not computer guys, so whatever it is has the church, and the name of the president is Dennis Rader. So they end up like, it's such a ridiculously like needless way for him to get caught, but that's the thing.
But ironically, like they get the DNA from his daughter. They kind of stalk him out and get the DNA from his daughter without her knowing and find out he's a match, and boom. Damn,
and I mean, when he gets caught, he's pretty sure they know everything. And like, he kind of says things like right off the bat that are like, he knows he's done for. He does initially, he waives his right to a preliminary hearing. He does initially put in a not guilty plea, but then in July of 2005, he ends up pleading guilty to all the BTK killings. And from what I understand, his lawyer and his team just felt like there was just so much evidence against him that they kind of knew.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he was just like, I'm done. Let me just have my moment of glory here, and I'm just going to. And then, in court, he pleads guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder, and then gives the super gory details of how he, selected, stalked, and killed all of his victims.
And so when he's giving these details, it is in his records, they find, 55 people who he has almost like a dossier on, on all their movement. And 10 of those people are obviously dead, but 45 were just living their lives, not knowing that they were in the crosshairs,
He actually like waited in some people's homes and they just didn't show up. Like he didn't, just things, he didn't always time things well. As we even saw in the murders, like things go differently than he plans. When you watch the confessions, which you can watch on YouTube, or, a lot of people probably already seen bits and pieces of them because it was a pretty big deal in 2005 when this happened. He's just very calm. He's collected, and he's super unaffected.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Without feel.
Yeah, and it's very matter of fact. He gives the information. He talks about like details of like, his sexual gratification, the things he was doing during all these things, just as much as he talks about like the murder itself. And it clearly appears to not care. that he's saying these things. There's no embarrassment. There seems to be no shame. Either that or he's just the flattest affected person in the world.
So with that said, let's get into a little tiny bit of the psychology of it, which I mean,
let me just, just so people know. So he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison. He wasn't given the death penalty because, let me see, he committed the murders. Was it because he committed the murders before Kansas had the death penalty?
there was some loophole, of course.
Yeah. They reintroduced the death penalty in 94. And so I'm assuming it's because the murders that he pleaded guilty for were, the last one was 91.
Right.
So he wasn't eligible for death penalty.
Right.
Is that how it works?
That's how it works. But I almost feel like maybe it's better that he suffers in prison.
Yeah, he's in like solitary confinement. Yeah. He's not getting any. I mean, he does have the ability to like have like an hour outside, I guess, for exercise, and he can do some mail. But he's had like he's even had an interview done while he's in prison. He wrote a book, which a lot of people feel strongly against. But he doesn't get any of the profits of that book. It goes all to the family of the victims, which I guess is good.
Yeah, I don't want to read it though. I see. That's I don't know. I think I'm good. I think it's important. See, that's the tough thing too. But it is important to understand the psychology because to see it in other people and sort of prevent these kinds of things.
Well, when you do hear him talk in his interview, this is where you start to understand him better. Do you know about Factor X?
Factor X, no.
Okay. So he describes the thing that kind of spawns his thought to kill as this thing called Factor X. And without Factor X, he doesn't believe he would kill. Factor X is this thing that gives him the urge to do these things, to go out and stalk and kill and all that stuff. What I hear when I hear him describe Factor X, it sounds like obsessive intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, so it's an intrusive thought without the capability, and it's not like the intrusive thoughts like we're talking about with don't worry, like with OCD or even anxiety or any of these things, but it's just an intrusive thought like anybody would have. Like maybe they see someone on the street and they're like, oh, I would like to have that person, or I would like to do this with that person, whatever it is, but he doesn't have the functioning prefrontal area in his brain that can pump the brakes. That's his executive function. He doesn't have the thoughts or the capacity for empathy where he would say, yeah, I could fulfill this urge of mine, but what would that do to this person and their family and their life? You know what I mean? So it's just, he's an animal because that's literally his base desires guide him. His base desires are more powerful than, the human element. What separates us from animals is we're able to empathize and to say and to plan and to say, no, we can't do that because that's going to hurt this person or that's going to ruin my own life, right? So he doesn't have that. So it's intrusive thoughts with no mechanism to stop them.
What if you take, obsessive intrusive thoughts, and you pair them with anything under like cluster B personality disorder, which could be like narcissistic personality, antisocial personality. You take the personality disorder and you mix it with the obsessive intrusive thought. I think that's almost like, and maybe a little bit of other stuff. Maybe there's some ADHD there with like the need to like multitask and, and obviously some other things. Doesn't that almost feel like a perfect like recipe for someone finding the ability to justify doing horrendous things?
It does, but again, I want to make clear because people listen to this who might be having intrusive thoughts. So an intrusive thought is going to highlight your values in a way that's interesting. So everyone has dark, intrusive thoughts. Everyone has shitty things that come into their mind. And if you don't like that, it kind of I don't like having that thought, right? That's good. But what we're talking about here is intrusive thoughts, things that pop into your mind. They're like, ooh, I would love to do that, but I can't because of this. Or I would love to do that, but I don't want to hurt this person, or I don't want this to happen to that person. That's what we're talking about here. Like dark desires, intrusive thoughts that you want, but you're able to act on them because you don't have the capacity for empathy, and nothing's stopping you like it is for the vast majority of people. That's what
So
separates.
think about someone who is like
Like a sadist, like that's or like some paraphilic disorder, some kind
or
of
even on like a significantly lesser scale than a serial killer, like someone who maybe is like has pedophilia thoughts,
Mhm.
or but that's actually like something that like sexually arouses them, right?
Oh,
Like they're like an actual sex offender or someone who struggles with sexual deviancy. So you have intrusive thoughts about, would it be, I guess it's not really an intrusive thought if it's something
right,
that actually
right,
gives you, so I guess that's
yes,
the wrong term.
right.
Obsessive thoughts
There we
about
go. Let's do that.
a sexual
Yeah.
deviancy, right? Mix that with, like I said, like a personality disorder, and it's almost a recipe for someone to engage in those behaviors, feel like they need to because they need to fulfill themselves, because like, the personality disorder, like making yourself feel good or trying to overcompensate or whatever it is, but then not be able to have to put the blame on yourself because that's a big part of it as well, right?
Yeah, so it's even better to just call them desires,
Yeah.
right? So it's like they have these desires,
Obsessive desires though, because it's
right?
obviously it's like not like he has an obsessive personality, I would say.
Antisocial desires, where it's like it's outside of the norm.
So, thinking about like this personality disorder type deal, right? I mean, narcissistic is definitely one that I think that fits him. I hear people say that one quite a bit with him. Antisocial probably comes up. It sounds like it could be a little bit of a mix of both
Well,
almost because of that.
malignant narcissism is with, when you're a narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial
Yeah.
traits. So it's probably
There is a thing about authority too in here. And he strives to be an authority, but it's almost like he's never like welcomed into an authority role. So he has to take like these
yeah.
lower
Yeah.
ranking
Kind
positions.
of authority. Like I'm the Cub Scout leader. Okay, that's an authority
Yeah.
position, I guess. But here in the third, so we talk about the cluster B, all right. So you're talking borderline, you're talking narcissistic, you're talking antisocial, and listen, histrionic, that's a cluster B, and that's more like attention seeking.
Yeah.
It sounds like he runs the gamut over there with the
Yeah. No, 100%. There's definitely a lot of that.
But again, not that those disorders
No, but it's like
make you
it's
bad.
like it,
Perfect storm.
perfect storm, because the obsessive desires, which obviously happened at a very early age, and he was always curious about them,
Yeah.
and actually like
And acted on them.
and he acted them at an early age too, like even just tying up. And maybe that sounds super innocent, but like, that just
Nope. Don't think
gateway
it
to
does.
something else. Yeah. Like, well, let's say you're playing a game of like cops and robbers or whatever, but
Oh,
like
yeah.
then you're getting a boner from that. It's like that is obviously something that
Yeah.
for him was like, wow, that felt really good, and now I'm going to try and do it again. And he
Like
found
his mom's
different
tucking him
ways.
in and he's like tighter. A little bit
Yeah.
tighter.
The Boston Strangler, from my understanding of the Boston Strangler, started as like a peeping Tom.
Yeah.
He
A lot
would
of
just
them
look
do.
through windows, and then he was like, committing rape. But it's that like, I'm going to go a little higher now. I'm going to go a little further now.
Yeah.
Right. So and that's like Dennis Rader as a child through his formative years into adulthood, just pushing that envelope further and further and always feeling like he's above the law. This thing that he strives to be, this authority figure, he's butting it his entire life, but then he's almost frustrated that he can't have that role.
Right.
But he wants
So
it because he wants to control people so bad.
the messaging here is definitely watch out for those kids that are messing with animals.
That's obviously
That is because look, it's with that.
I would love to know the statistics though. I had a patient.
Mm-hmm. Oh
He's
boy.
a young boy.
Oh God.
And we went outside to go play at our office. I took him outside to go play catch or something. He found a dead bird in the grass, and he started to like fling it up in the air. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Oh no,
And I was like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, what did I just see?
What's Myers' doctor's name?
Loomis.
That's you, dude.
Yeah.
Dr. Dave Loomis.
There's evil in his eyes.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, look, throwing around a bird, it's never good. I've never done it, never would. I mean,
I don't think I've ever like yelled though before, especially in this role. And I was like, no, don't do that.
yeah, yeah.
Like, why would you
I'm
do that?
transferring you. It's funny. Even my kids, when they go outside and they like, if they step on a bug outside, I'll be like, listen, outside is their world. Don't
Yeah,
come out here stomping on bugs outside. What are
come
you
on.
crazy? In the house, all right, fair game. You're an intruder at that point. So I think like I'm not scooping up spiders in my hands. I'm not that kind of person. You make it into the house, you're dying. But unless you're an ant, I'm friendly with ants. But I don't know, man. It's just there's no need for it. So actually, I think we've really kind of like stepped into the psychology here, and we have to admit that this is horrific darkness inside this guy. But again, it's just a piece of the puzzle. All these cluster B diagnoses, the lack of empathy playing a huge role here. But all these things alone don't make you dangerous. It's just the awfulness of the person. The same way if Dennis Rader, was I don't know, maybe like a genius, that could make him just as like even more dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's just a perfect storm. I think when we nail it with that, it's a George Clooney.
Yeah,
Mark
I
Wahlberg
actually feel like if you took away the personality disorder away from him and you just had the dangerous thoughts, you would just have a person with some really dangerous thoughts that probably would never
Yeah.
engage in those, but would struggle with them. I'm sure you'd probably see a very different version of this person.
Right.
One who was very tormented by the thoughts, and you'd probably see him very emotional and conflicted. And he would be a rather interesting person to talk to about all those things. But because of the personality disorder and those, those dark thoughts, it just causes someone, in the cluster B personality, like one of the things that's part of that is this sense of entitlement. So this like having a sense of deserving respect and power and authority and attention, and that fits him to a T. Then there's like this situational morality, like I got to do what I got to do to have their needs met. So and that fits him in many ways, and like even if it's criminal activity, that's fine. There's that self-justification. There's so many different things that really fit him, and like we said, it's just that perfect storm of these factors.
That's the thing. Like, there's no smoking. See, but it's almost like missing one piece of the perfect storm. There's no smoking gun. There's not like there's this trauma that we can look at and say, oh, there's that too.
And that's caused people a lot of difficulty over the years. Is like people almost feel like there's something he's not saying, or there's something he won't admit.
Right.
And it feels like that. It feels like it would be sexual of nature, but like a violent sexual nature, right?
But Dahmer didn't have it either. Maybe it's just in utero, or there's a lot.
Well, with Dahmer, there was kind of that neglect from the family. Like there was a breakup, difficult marriage, and he started drinking at a young age. Like there was all these different factors that make up, and then he got that obsession with like the dead animals, right?
Right.
And there was like a lot of antisocial things with him too. He didn't know how to like get involved. Like he didn't know how to socialize. He had to find weird ways to do it.
I mean, we hear stories. I mean, if you guys want to listen to past episodes, I mean, you hear a story like Billy Milligan, you get it. You get why that went sideways. This kind of story, what makes it scary, it's harder to understand. It would make everyone a lot more comfortable. Like, oh, that's what happened to him, and that's why he's scary, and that's why that can never be me or never be my family.
This is the opposite of Eileen Wuornos.
Yeah,
this is not, environment created. This is biological.
Yep. So that begs the question, or answers the question: can you be born evil? I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, you think like when we hear the Beth Thomas case, you kind of have to be conditioned for evil. That's possible, yeah. And we see that with the Wuornos, and we see that there's plenty of proof of that. But can you just be born evil? Apparently so.
Yep.
Apparently so.
And it's remarkable how someone can compartmentalize so well. This one part of him is very much like a law-abiding citizen. Like he's in the compliance officer role. He's like making everybody follow the laws and the rules. But then he can go and break every single one of them on his own.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
And it, like I said, that's like, they're just the domains in his life never seem to spill over. There is one interview of him in prison. He does get emotional when he's discussing stuff, but he gets emotional only when talking about what's happened to him and his family.
Right.
He starts to cry a little bit when he's discussing like how this has all impacted him and his family.
Yeah, like how
That's the
wide it
only
sucks
thing
for him now. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Oh,
that really highlights that narcissism, right?
it really does.
It's all about him.
Well, did you ever watch that show Mindhunter?
You know what? I did. I'm trying to remember if I finished it though.
Well, it
I
was
know
a
I
little.
watched season 1. I know he's represented in there.
He was. I think if they had gotten another season, it kind of left a cliffhanger, like a cliffhanger on an ADT man,
Yeah, I feel like I might have gotten up to that point. I'm trying to remember.
and it was like, oh wow, okay, so that was like
Yeah.
they're gonna be doing this next, and then they never got a second season or the third season, or whatever. How many?
Right.
All I know is that show was great, and I'm surprised it's terrible.
Oh, I do remember that. Now that you're saying this, I do remember. There was like kind of leading up for a while. There was like a lead up to that character. Yes, I remember that, and I was like kind of excited because I was like, hoping that would be part of the storyline. There is a BTK movie. There's a couple. They're kind of lower budget ones. There's one though that the guy who plays BTK is Kane Hodder, which that is important to me because Kane Hodder is everybody's favorite Jason from the Friday the 13th movies.
Oh, yeah,
he's in like all the best ones. He's in Jason X, Friday the 13th, 6 and 7, I believe. He's pretty much known as
okay. As far as Jason goes, he's on the Mount Rushmore.
He plays Dennis Rader pretty good though. I have to say. And even though it's kind of a lower budget movie, there was a few of those. There was like a Dahmer one. There was a Bundy movie, BTK, and I'm trying to remember if there was any Gacy. Yeah, there's a few of those movies that they're kind of feel like they're all made by like the same place.
Yeah,
but worth checking out. It's on Tubi if people want to give it a watch.
All right. Well, I mean, do we have any final thoughts for this? What I mean, it's almost like, what's this like for his wife and kids? It's got to be kind of.
His daughter wrote a book.
Yeah.
About that. She got rather upset at the number of people that were like profiting off of this. And
I hope she hates him.
Yeah, it's like it's not the people that are profiting off of his fault. It's his fault for doing this. But I get it. It's like it's obviously it's done a lot to a lot of families. And
we're talking about it, but we're certainly not profiting from it.
That's for sure.
All right,
so
Dave.
Yeah,
I mean,
all right.
you got this one, so I think next time we lighten it up a little bit.
I guess.
Yeah,
we'll see.
All right.
Okay, so everybody, thank you for tuning in. We will be back obviously next week with a new episode. But in the meantime, if you want to connect, obviously reach out any of our socials, send fan mail through the little link on wherever you're streaming this. Join our subscriptions page that is on our social media. I believe it's on our Instagram. There's a link to it. Leave a rating and review. That would be super appreciated wherever you're listening. Yeah, that's the same stuff I say every week. So
well, we got to say
you get the gist.
Important to say it.
We do have to say it. We did get a couple of people reaching out. Not going to share their messages because they were sent to us on. We got an email and a DM, but like just more like people just sharing these great connections to it. Actually, we did get a fan mail, which I will read because those are not as private. So let me just pull that up real quick. Hey, Dave and Greg, I'm Heather. I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I absolutely love it. Tons of helpful information, and I like the different insights. I've actually recommended your podcast to my therapist. I'm originally from Attleboro, Mass, right next to RI. I just wanted to say, keep up the great work. Love listening to you both. And that's someone from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. New Hampshire. Thank you so much, Heather, for that fan mail. That is awesome. I actually live right next to Attleboro, so I'm Like,
So isn't it
right
kind of?
there.
I feel bad when we get the fan mail, even though I love it. It's just like there's no way to respond to it, which is kind of
I know
feel.
yeah, just so you guys are aware, we cannot respond to fan mail. We can only receive it and obviously, give you a shout out on here.
But we do love it.
Which, yeah, it is very cool. And, sharing with your therapist, geez, they must hate us. What would
Yeah.
you do, Greg, if I was like, oh, you got to hear this? If I was your patient, I was like, you got to hear this podcast from these two therapists. They sound genius.
Oh man, I'd be hurt. Firstly,
I kind of could do my own podcast.
yeah. I mean, I'll send you one I like. So I've sent or I've like recommended this podcast to like students, not telling them that it's mine. Just like, oh, this is the one I really enjoy, and I feel like it has more clout that way, right?
Do they know it's you? Always.
Yeah. Once they dabble,
Yeah.
Or I make like that I make them do a paper on The Alchemist, and I'll just be like, well, this is a good way to learn everything about The Alchemist.
Oh, Greg.
Oh boy. All right. Well, listen, Dave. Good time as always.
Yes, absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you next week. Have a great night. Stay blessed.
Stay blessed.
Blessings.
Mm.
Night.